Hello there everyone. So today is time to open up another ScrawlrBox. I've had this sitting in my studio for a bit, so I'm quite anxious what's in it because also this one is really thick. You can see it's basically bulging. So why don't we just get straight into it? And it literally just wants to pop open. Ooh, that looks interesting. And we have the scene, obviously. We have the art print and aqua pad. I thought it looked a little bit watercolory, but this looks very beautiful. Lots of little fishies that way. Wow, that is detailed. Blooming heck. Very pretty. And the artist is Katie Smith. Right, so first of all, like I said, we get the pad here. So it's watercolor, and this is very thick. So that feels nice. Now the question is, what kind of watercolor materials are we getting? Aha, interesting. Right, first of all, the sweet fizzy rolls. Never tried them before. And we have the sticker, which is part of the print. Right, so the actual Scrawler challenge here is between the reef, which obviously goes well with the print. And then we have our materials. So also we actually get a jelly roll here. Definitely collect a lot of these, don't you, when you get the Scrawler boxes. And it looks like we get a watercolor palette. I was going to say if I could get into it, and I realized, no, it's actually, wait a minute. Oh, that's the inside, I think. There we go. Okay, pastel shades paint pan set. Right, so this is different. I've never seen a watercolor palette packaged like this before. How do you open that? There we go. Oh, that's definitely different. They do look a little bit odd, these, almost like they're quite chalky looking. And oh, we also get a brush inside of the palette and then a little sponge there. So this is interesting looking. I think I just need to read a bit because this doesn't look like regular watercolors. Okay, so perfect pastel palette. A gouache style pigmented paint palette in soft and playful pastel shades that dry to a matte finish. Interesting. I'm very curious to see how these actually look then and how they are to work with, because I've never used anything like this. So kind of watercolory, gouache-y, but in pastel shades. The texture on them is just really, really different. It's just got a very weird texture to it when they're dry. I guess we just gotta jump in and try them out. Right, so I filled the brush with water here, and I thought I'd just do a bit of swatching first of all. Get an impression what they feel like to work with. Now this paper is really thick, so let's start making the paints a bit wet. Even doing this when I'm adding water to it, it kind of looks quite chalky. It's definitely very unusual. Right, let's see what this looks like. Let's just do all of them, shall we? Because I'm quite curious, some of the colours, also if they actually look like they do in the pan, especially with that one here, because that one's called Silver Blue. So just to see what that actually looks like. So far they look like they do in the pan. They look very soft and pastel-y, which is obviously what they're supposed to be. And this row down here from the yellow to the red, very sunrise colours. It'd be beautiful to do something with them. Nice gradients or something. They do seem to lay down quite nicely. So they are pigmented, but obviously you do get that pastel feel. Right, let's try that Silver Blue. I'm wondering whether it's kind of just like a grey. Yeah, I would say grey. It does have kind of a bit of a silver feel to it, but obviously not really metallic, but definitely has a blue undertone as well. But that's actually a really nice array of colours that. I especially like this side here. Right, so let's try and do a bit of layering, I think. So let's add quite a bit of paint down and let that dry. And I think I also want to do one that's darker. Let's just do the blue and maybe see how a lighter one layers on top of it. So I'm just going to leave that to dry. See how that layers on top. And while that completely finishes drying, I just thought I would also try the jelly roll here on top of them to see how that works. Because my thought is if they're a bit chalky, these paints, it could maybe obstruct the flow of the pen. So obviously that could very well affect the final piece that I want to end up making. Because if it's easy to use, then great. If it's not, then it'd be quite good to know that. Okay, that actually does not seem to be working the best on top of these paints. That does seem like it's struggling quite a bit. It's picking up the paint or the kind of chalkiness from the paint and clogging up by the looks of it a little bit. So that's not ideal. Right, that makes it a little bit kind of how you're supposed to use this jelly roll with the paints if it's kind of just clogging up. It's not really doing much at all. Okay, well that's not great. Hey, we'll see what we can do. So I started out with a sketch of a few jellyfish. I kind of thought keep it a bit simple, and also I was definitely inspired by the Scrawler challenge and also the artwork from the box. So like I said, a few jellyfish, some big ones and some small ones, and I kind of wanted to just fill in with the colour just to see mostly how the colour was going to be, because I was very intrigued by this whole texture and the final impression of them. So I started out using the two blues in the palette, the lighter one on top and the darker one on the bottom, because I wanted to create a bit of a gradient. So the darker bit on the bottom was kind of more the deep sea. And I also then wanted to see how the colours would blend together, which actually worked out quite nicely. Now, the first layer or so, it does seem less opaque, which obviously is natural, but you can definitely layer it up, which I did. And it turned out to be really quite opaque the more you layered it up. So I was really kind of impressed with that, because that's definitely different than regular watercolors. And that way you can also use these paints in different ways, because you can both use them as less opaque watercolors, but then also layer them to get a more opaque finish. And once I'd finished the background and did a few layers of them and the blending, I actually really like how it ended up looking. So I definitely like the finish of these paints, that's for sure. Then moving on to the jellyfish themselves, I wanted to basically have each jellyfish be a different colour. So on one I focused on more the pink purple colour, on one I focused on the orange yellow colour, and so on. And I wanted to also create a bit of a blend within them, so it wasn't just a flat colour in the whole jellyfish. And the point was though to put the colour down in the colours that I wanted, but then afterwards I did want to add more detail, and I wasn't sure as I was doing this what kind of detail and what materials to use for that, because like I mentioned earlier, the jelly roll that comes with the box here didn't really work, which I did want to use, but I wasn't going to try and force myself to use it and get really frustrated. So I also thought to use a liner, a regular fine liner, but I didn't really want to add the black lines because I wanted to keep it more light and airy rather than kind of the heaviness and more detailed outlines of black liner. So I wasn't still sure what I was going to do as I was painting. I thought I'll paint first and then I'll leave that till the end and see if I can come up with something. But I'll get to that in a bit. So moving on to the kind of tentacle thingies coming from the jellyfish, I did paint over the thin ones with the background colour because I thought it would be a faff to try and go around them. And I did think because this watercolour is semi-opaque that I'd be able to then afterwards put them back on top. So that's why I painted over them at first, and then afterwards took a finer brush and went back in with the colour and went on top of the background, and that actually worked out really well. So these watercolors are opaque enough to do that, which is also a really nice feature of them. Both just doing one go over or one layer with the tentacle thingies, but you could obviously go over them a couple times depending how strong of the colour you want it to be. So we are getting to the point where I finished the painting part of it and I need to move on and see what I wanted to do with the details. So this is where I ended up having to go through my own stash of art materials because, like I said, that jelly roll, I couldn't get it to work and I wasn't going to kind of keep fighting with it. So this is what it looks like without any detail on. And I ended up picking out a few things that I wanted to try on the paint and see if they would work. So first of all, I started with another white gel pen, and this is the Signal Ball one, whatever it's called, and I thought this might work better than the jelly roll one, but it didn't really. That also got clogged up. You can see it on the very tip that I show you as well. So I had to put that one aside too. Now I thought maybe a colour pencil would work, a white one obviously. So I got one that I had out for that, a Caran d'Ache one, and it turns out that was also a fail. So you'll see that next. Basically that just didn't do anything at all. So yeah, I'm wondering what can I do? So here's the colour pencil. Like I said, that didn't do anything at all. That was worse than the gel pens. So that quickly got put aside. Now I had one option left, and that's Copic white. I can't remember what it's called, but opaque white that I've had for a long time and I've never used it, but I thought it's kind of basically like a paint, so surely that must work, and thankfully it did. So I ended up using that one. So I wanted to add details, like I said, and also some bubbles in that, and using a paintbrush that worked just fine on top of this watercolor paint, so at least I could start doing some form of detail.
So I ended up taking a very fine liner brush to try and get the details here as kind of fine as possible so they wouldn't be too obvious and in your face. And I didn't go all the way around all the jellyfish or anything. I just kind of wanted to point out some places where there was separation between different layers and that. So that's what I ended up doing on the kind of mid part here. And then I also wanted to use it to add in extra tentacles. And again, I used that fine brush for that as well. And I actually think doing those things, just those things alone, really helped improve the piece. Just adding in those little details without them being harsh and black like a normal fine liner would be. And I also added a bit of texture within the jellyfish and soles. So I'm pretty pleased how that turned out. Now I also used it for bubbles around the jellyfish because they are in water. And I was a little bit, I didn't want to sit and try and paint a bunch of circles because ain't nobody got time for that. So I wanted to try and find a tool I could use to kind of create decent circles and make it quicker. So I ended up using a friction pen that I have where one end is obviously where the pen part is, it comes out, so I used that as the bigger bubble, and then the other part is the eraser part because it's an erasable pen, and that one worked really well for the small bubble, so I ended up actually using that and it worked out quite well, I think. Now they're not all perfect circles, but I actually think that's for the better because it makes it a little bit more lively and I guess natural because nothing's perfect in nature. So I'm actually pleased with how that turned out, and it also made it go a lot quicker and just easier in general. So this is the pen that I used. So I will definitely use this trick in the future, and it worked really well with that Copic opaque white. Obviously it will work with any paint as well. So I was pretty pleased with that. And also it is a pen that I use, but it wasn't a problem afterwards when I used it for this. I just kind of wiped it off and it came off clean, and I can easily use it for a regular pen still. And then just add in the last bubbles, and this is then the final piece. I actually think it's okay how it turned out. It definitely helped adding those white details and bubbles, so that's a plus that I was able to find something that could work. Otherwise, I really hope you enjoyed this. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one.